Welcome to Indie Resources' fourth video on how to build a browser-based MMO version 2.0. Basically in this video we are going to create the map system. It's a great starting point for the kind of get into the SQL, building the engine, that type of stuff. So it's definitely a good place to start. I don't really want to start on the login system and all that just yet. I want to get things rolling here first and then we'll work on the rest. Get in some exciting stuff in the beginning. So to start out, go into your scripts. Let's create a new folder, and I am going to do this like just kind of on the whim. I didn't prepare for this whatsoever, so if I make mistakes we'll just kind of learn about it together. Inside that JS, let's create another folder and let's call it engine so we can store all of our engine stuff in there. And let's create a new JavaScript file. We're going to call it map.js, and it's going to have a lot of different map stuff in there actually. We're going to have a map builder and things like that. So let's open this up in brackets, and we're going to build our first function in JavaScript. For those of you who don't know JavaScript, function is basically just something you can call, and whatever's in there, it will run every time you call it, and you'll understand later when we get into it. So I'm going to call it build map, and so what we basically want to do, we're going to do a couple things first. We want this to be a grid, and it's going to be 5 across and 5 down, so it's going to be 25 squares. The character will be in the middle, and you'll be able to click which way you want to move, and then the other ones are there just so you can kind of see where you're going, and it's not so closed like the normal 9-grid system. So what we want to do is we want to come into our index file. We want to find, so you want to scroll down until you find your second row where it's column 1, and then there's that column 4. We want to get rid of all that text in there, and we want to basically create a div id equals map. We'll just call it map. I'm not worried about giving it a class or anything right now. We'll worry about that later. So we have a div inside there now. Let's go back to our map, and what we want to do is we want to make a loop. We don't want to have to build every single grid. We want to just be able to loop through and build them kind of automatically, because I could, if I wanted to, come in here and put all 25 of them, but that's just kind of silly. So here's how we're going to fix that. We're going to call document. We're going to use the DOM, which is document object model. A lot of people are going to be like, well, you have jQuery, why aren't you using that? A, because when I'm doing stuff like this, it often breaks on me, and B, this is much simpler for people to learn for now. So I'm just going to do it this way, and you can just, if you have another way you want to do it, I'm fine with that. Document.getElement by ID, we're going to call the map. So basically all this does, all you need to know by this is this grabs a div and gives you, and opens up all of its attributes that it has and things like that. So you can get into all kinds of stuff, the styles, all kinds of cool stuff. What we want though is we don't want anything with it right now. What we want to do is, so we don't have to keep calling that every time, what we're going to do is we're going to do, var, which basically instantiates a variable. It creates a variable, empty object, not really an object, an empty container. And we're just going to call it map equals. So now what we're doing is we're just storing that whole div into just map, so we don't have to keep calling that. Now we need to create a loop. So let's do for var, and I'll explain this as once we get through it, equals 0, and then while I is less than 25, just kind of pretty that up a little bit, I plus plus. So what this basically does, for those of you who don't know the loop, it starts out creating a variable called I, and it's at 0. While I is less than 25, it will loop through here. And then, so every time it loops once, this is what it does, it's just going to add 1. So it's going to start at a 0, and then 1, and then 2. Now, it's going to go 25 times, even though it's going to end at 24. The reason why is because it's a 0-based index, and it starts at 0. So 0 is actually 1, so forth. Not really important that you know it, other than when you're using it later, just remember that it starts out at 0, so you're always 1 ahead of yourself. So that's why you want to kill it off 1 early. You do it this way, you'd always just end it where you would truly, how many times you want it to loop through here. So next we want to do is we want to do map.inner HTML, which is actually the text inside of it. We're going to do a plus equals because we want to add to it. And then we want to create a new div. We're going to give it an ID of grid, but we also want to make each one its own, plus I. So what I'm doing is I'm concatenating this on there. So basically it's going to call it grid plus whatever I is. So it'll first one will be grid 0, first one will be grid 1, grid 2, grid 3, so forth. And then we want to give it a class of grid. I don't have any of these defined yet, but we will. And let's close off our grid. I believe that should work. Just to test it, let's just put test in here so we can see test go off 25 times. Blah, blah, blah. Looks like it's good. Let's look at our index. We need to call that function now. So from our index, build map. And so you can see how much easier this is. Instead of having all of this in our index file and having to rewrite it, now all we have to do is call this. There's only one thing missing. How does the index know that this map exists or that function exists? We need to add that. So let's just copy this and be lazy about it. And it's still alive. Now we want scripts /js/engine/map. And now that we've called it, now we can use it. So let's see what happens when we try to use it. Let's refresh. So it worked. So you see how easy that was to create each div 25 times. Makes it much easier than having to try to create it without it. Now the only problem is now we don't have them where they're supposed to be. So now let's try to create, let's make them first line up 5 this way. And see, this may be the wrong size. I may have to work with this too. We may have to play with this, but let's make them line up this way and then bounce back. So what we need to do is we need to do a little bit of CSS manipulation. So we're going to do .grid, which is the class that we called it. It means every single one of them with the class. So for those of you also that don't understand CSS classes and divs, when you define a div, it's only going to work for that single ID on that div. So if you, and we haven't really got into it yet, we haven't really created one here, but we will with a class. Everything that has that class is going to get this. So how the columns all get it, anything that I put temp as the class will get that. It's basically makes it to where you don't have to create a whole bunch of different of these. So with grid, we want to do a float left. For now, we're going to do a height. Oops, man. Height. Let's just try 30 pixels. Width 30 pixels. I know we're probably going to make those bigger, but and then let's do a border so we know how big they are. We can kind of see. Let's do 1px solid. We might want to go ahead and do a border color, otherwise we're not going to be able to see it. So let's see if that worked. So it did. So what's happening right here is it's actually it's going until it hits the end and then it falls back. The only problem you're going to have with that, we don't want to keep it that way, because if you notice, that's where the map's going to get really funny and change on us. So that's something we're definitely going to have to make sure we fix, which we're going to do right now. So the float left basically means that it's going to float. It's not going to fall every single time. But obviously we need to be way bigger than 30. So let's do 100 by 100. Okay, so as you can see, our only issue now, it made them bigger, but they're still the 6, it's still 6 by, it's all off. We need it 5 by 5. So to fix this, we're going to actually create we're going to change our floats around a little bit. So we're going to do a dot, let's call this break grid, and we are going to do a float clear and actually no, I'm sorry, it's a clear left, and then a clear, a float. It's weird how this works. I've never quite understood it, but it seems like it works. But then the other thing we want to do is we want to copy the rest of this stuff here so it's the same. Then we go back to our map. So here's where we need to tell it. There's a couple different ways we can do this. We could do it kind of a fancy way. We can do it kind of a more understandable way. I'd much rather do the more understandable way, so let's do it that way. We're going to do a var counter equals 0, and then we're going to do a counter plus plus. So basically it's just an empty counter that's going to count every time it goes by. The other way you could do this is just by taking and dividing I by 5, and if there's no remainder, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do it this way. First thing we're going to do is we're going to check if counter equals equals 5. Let's see, one that should be 6 though. Do we want it on the 6th one? Let's try 4. We need to put another equal sign there. So your single equals is more of an equals. This is checking if it is equal to with the double. And we do else. The only thing I don't like about brackets, it doesn't seem to want to make my code very pretty. If it does, then we want to make counter equals 0. We want to reset counter, but then also we want to kind of copy this, and instead of just the grid on the class, we are going to do break grid, and we're going to call this break so we know where it ends up. Let's give it a shot. Okay, so it looks like these are working. This is the only one that's not working because of that original. So we need to think about that one, but it looks like the rest of it, this part of it, does work. So maybe I need to make that first counter, maybe I need to make it 5 and then everything else 1. That's what I need to do. So we make this equals 5, this equal 1. That may just work. Yep, okay. So basically what it does is it goes through and counts once it gets to this, when it gets to the final one, it breaks it. It comes down and breaks a new one, breaks it, breaks a new one. Now you will notice because of the responsive setting, it still could have possibly map issues, and we will fix that later, but for now we at least know that this part's fixed. The other thing that we can do is, because we have so much more room here, we could probably expand, or at least right here, we could expand these and make these a little bigger. So let's do that next. Let's go to, and we are going to put there will be backgrounds in these to where you won't see that. So let's go back to our style sheet, and let's make them, now here's the other thing that we could do too. Let me show you something about CSS that's really neat. We could actually take all of this out and leave only that, and we have grid and break grid. What we can do is we can come back into our index, I'm sorry, back into our map, and how we have break grid here, we can just put a space and give it grid as well, and that way, yeah, grid. That way it should still work the same. That way basically we're just adding both classes to it, is all we're doing. That way you don't have to have double here. The reason why I say that is because every time I change this, I don't want to change it in 2 places. I only want to change it in 1. So let's see what, let's try 140, see what that looks like. You'll have to excuse my WAMP. For some reason it's having an issue with it. It just likes to hang up sometimes. I don't get it, but having that problem more and more. So they're too big. So let's, and that's going to be the thing too with, for right now, depending on your screen size, that may change. So we are going to have to make that that column a minimum width, and I'm going to show you that here in a minute. So let's try 130. Oh, usually it's not this bad. What we can do for the minimum width is we can come in here and we can do minimum width, and since we've got 130 times 5, we're looking at what, 650 pixels, I believe. Yeah. So we're about right there. Let's see, make sure that still works. I may have to restart my WAMP server. It's acting really funny right now. So anyway, that should make it to where no matter what we do with our size, our responsive size, wow, Oh, my bad. That was, we can't do it on that. We have to do it on the actual map div. So here's where we can come in and do on map, which that's going to be actually, so that's what I was talking about. With the dot, it's a class. With this, with the pound sign, that's going to be for your ID. So when we look at like, where's our map at? Did I pass it? Yeah. So with map, it's an ID, so it's going to need the pound sign. But if I was to come in here and put class, then you would use the dot. Okay. So here we want to do minimum width 650. Hopefully it doesn't take forever. That's odd. Usually it only does it once every now and then. I'll restart after this video. But once it kicks through, what it should do is this should be a minimum width now of 650 no matter how we size this. And then that way, when it sizes down, you'll at least have your map there and it won't be broken up all like crazy. So if you notice now, it doesn't matter. It'll kill everything else. It's going to make sure that map is right. So no matter how big your screen is, it's going to fit right. We may end up playing with these a little more to make sure that they work properly. The neat thing is once we remove these lines, you won't notice it and everything will be more fluid and it'll kind of just float there. These may be a tad too big. We'll test it out on a couple different browsers to see where we want. But for now, at least we've got the map built. And if you actually do a inspect element on this, you will notice that all the grids, not sure why that's plus, I may have messed something up there, but it's supposed to be grid 0. Let's see what we did that, and then we'll stop this video. The video is getting pretty long. Oh, that's why. Hopefully my refresh doesn't take forever. There we go. So now you can see grid 0, grid 1, grid 2. So now they're all called something different, and we can name them how we want. So after this, we'll start working on attaching the database to this.